You know when I was first given Tylenol? In the hospital after my son was born. And it really worked. And Tylenol is the pain reliever hospitals use most. That means I can really trust Tylenol.
In the fall of 1982, Tylenol was a trusted brand, but it had its good name called into question when someone poisoned a few bottles of Tylenol and then returned the bottles to the shelf. As soon as it was discovered that death was linked to the consumption of Tylenol, police cars with loudspeakers went up and down the streets of Chicago, warning people not to take Tylenol. The company sacrificed over $100 million by pulling Tylenol off of store shelves all over the country. In 6 weeks' time, the company restored its good name when they invented the safety seal. People still use Tylenol today. If the company did not respond quickly, communicate clearly, and be transparent, then in the court of public opinion, people might conclude that the company was partly responsible. This is known as crisis management. But there's another way to manage a crisis. In a 1995 national news interview, a man exposed tobacco companies for intentionally manipulating nicotine levels in cigarettes to keep users hooked. The tobacco companies responded fiercely to this exposure, and people are still smoking today. These two examples of crisis management will help us understand religion's role in world affairs. You are participants in this court of public opinion. The following questions demand your attention. Would a creator take full responsibility for a crisis that was no fault of his own to make things better? Or would he approve of a system that causes suffering and not give you any clear answers toward a recovery? One is true and the other is a lie. Lies are used to protect appearances instead of addressing the real issue. The prophet Isaiah had to foretell that the truth would be evident at a future time. Lies also cause confusion, and if people are confused, does justice get served? Do people change their harmful behavior? By stating that there are only two roads, Jesus simplified all the confusion that's caused with the appearance of so many religions. Hence, there is true religion, as illustrated with Tylenol, and there is false religion, as illustrated with tobacco. All those who accept the truth will survive when the current system comes to an end. First, in speaking of true religion's role, number 1, it must be no part of the world, and 2, it must obey God by practicing love. God's good name was called into question when one angel began making accusations and attacking God's sovereign right to set boundaries. The immediate response was to clearly communicate a recovery. It involves the most valuable sacrifice one can make, and it's transparent. In the court of public opinion, have you heard people say, "Oh, God knew Adam was going to sin. He's partly responsible." Or people may say, "Oh, the Bible contradicts itself. It's not clear." Or there's good in all religions. Well, religion is a form of worship, and it includes a system of attitudes, beliefs, and practices. These may be personal or they may be advocated by an organization. Religion usually involves belief in a God. The system of attitudes, beliefs, and practices of true religion restores God's name Jehovah to its rightful place as universal sovereign, the one whose rulership is legitimate. Now, many religions don't even know God's name. A common practice among Jews is not even to pronounce it. So how can they restore God's name? Some religions may say that they believe in one God and the teachings of Jesus, but they're oblivious to the issues of universal sovereignty. Others may believe in submission to Allah, or they may follow a path of enlightenment through understanding suffering. They may have a diverse set of beliefs in karma and many gods or no God. There's good in these religions, but do they address the issue of universal sovereignty? The Bible makes it clear that sovereignty is the defining issue. Jesus is speaking to his disciples and also about his disciples' transparency. The key point is in the middle of the verse where it says, "You are no part of the world." In this context, the Greek word cosmos refers to the world of mankind apart from God's servants. The word world is here referring to the unrighteous human society alienated from God. The world has established many governments that call themselves sovereign. Now later, in John chapter 18, verse 36, after Jesus further clarifies that his kingdom is no part of the world, he says, "If my kingdom were part of this world, my attendants would have fought that I should be handed over to the Jews." We understand that religion in the form of Christianity was not to establish a sovereign government at this time. That means there's no such thing as a Christian nation. If we want to be part of God's solution to human problems, then we need to be transparent in doing so. People need to see that we as individuals are true to God's kingdom and no part of any other kingdom. So we obey Jesus' command to keep free from the world's political affairs. Now you may say, "I don't believe in organized religion." Well, when a company is going through a crisis, it must be organized and cooperate with authorities to restore its good name. It's the same for true religion. It's organized and cooperates with worldly authorities. Next, the identifying mark of Christ's followers is love. Christians love their neighbor. That's why we go and talk to people, as difficult as it is, about religion. Christians are also commanded to love one another. As difficult as it is talking to others about religion, does loving one another also have its challenges? In the book of Acts, chapter 10 and verse 34, it says, "At this Peter began to speak and said, 'Now I truly understand that God is not partial.'" Peter said these words because he had just seen how God's own hand directed matters so that a family of Gentiles became acceptable to God. This was a challenge because Peter himself formerly considered Gentiles to be unclean and unacceptable. God's servants are commanded to have no nationalistic or racist divisions worldwide. Now, how do genuine Christians show love among themselves in the face of such challenges? One principle Jesus stated is going the extra mile. It's valid not only for governmental requirements, but also in everyday human relations. If someone asks you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. In other words, the scope of any difficulty we may face is only temporary next to the kingdom's hope. So we show principled love to our brothers. In fact, we put up with each other in love. Now we'll talk about world religions that fail to obey God rather than men. On April 14th, 1994, tobacco executives spread out their palms. Each one of them said, "I believe nicotine is not addictive." Now, did they think the truth would ever be discovered? Well, an insider known as a whistleblower said that not only did they know nicotine was addictive, they purposely created cigarettes to be a delivery device for nicotine. This one man's exposure is a crisis. The tobacco industry responded by using the weight of authority, a gag order, so that this man couldn't talk. In addition, they tried to destroy his reputation with a smear campaign so that no one would believe him. Now, they assaulted him financially and psychologically. It was well organized. The prophet Isaiah is an insider. He had inside information as to how Jehovah feels about false religion. "And when you spread out your palms, I hide my eyes from you. Although you offer many prayers, I am not listening. Your hands are filled with blood. This accounts for any nation, religious group, or person not acting in accord with God's revealed standards. Isaiah is blowing the whistle on religious displays that are pointless. Even the nation of Israel failed to properly represent God. Jesus also had inside information. He could read people's hearts, and he told religious leaders, "You wish to do the desires of your father the devil." Later, they used the weight of Roman authority to kill Jesus. But Jesus gathered followers who cooperate with the authorities by paying back Caesar's things to Caesar, only if there is no conflict in paying God's things to God, which is consistently understood as being neutral, no part of the world. Christianity itself becomes a crisis to human rulership, and Jesus blew the whistle on what would become an apostasy. True to that prophecy, Roman Emperor Constantine usurped the Christian name and maintained a government on earth. Soldiers who fought in wars since Roman times didn't know Jesus taught his followers to be no part of the world. They couldn't understand the Bible. It wasn't in their language. Then in 1524, a man named Tyndale translated the Bible into one of the common languages. To protect appearances, the dominant church at the time responded by using the weight of authority. It published the King James Version of the Bible in 1611, also known as the Authorized Version. They also smeared Tyndale's reputation by burning him and others at the stake. The religions that followed in this apostasy never changed their harmful behavior. They continued waging war. It's well documented that wars were fought for years in Europe, largely along religious grounds. So it is with all religions of this world alienated from God. They do not obey God as ruler. And I'm quoting, "They are part of Satan's world because of meddling in politics. They've supported nationalistic and racist wars. Many conflicts are fueled by long-standing ethnic and religious differences." How does the sovereign of the universe respond to this continued hypocritical situation? At Isaiah chapter 2 and verse 4, it says, "He will render judgment among the nations and set matters straight respecting many peoples." Basically, Isaiah is telling us that justice will be served. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning shears. People will change their harmful behavior. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, nor will they learn war anymore. Religion that is true won't be learning war anymore. An impartial worldwide brotherhood is a crisis for Satan's rebellious system. In the early part of the 20th century, Jehovah's Witnesses became whistleblowers by putting into practice what it says here in Isaiah. One observer noted that Jehovah's Witnesses have consistently maintained their stand of nonviolent Christian neutrality, and with their preaching efforts, many people could understand the Bible's clear message. Maintaining neutrality is transparent. Satan also organized a smear campaign to attack our credibility, and we've been assaulted physically and financially. In addition, Satan has one particular response that he has mastered, and that's Babylon the Great. Again, we learned from the tobacco industry. After it was proven that tobacco executives had lied under oath, the industry was hit with a $246 billion judgment. Besides cigarettes, they have other ways to deliver nicotine. Now they have nicotine patches, gums, lozenges, e-cigarettes, vapes, and even pouches, inhalers, and nasal sprays. Nicotine the Great has created many guises to keep people hooked on the harmful product and ignoring the real issue that nicotine is addictive. In crisis management, this particular response is known as spinning alternative stories or flooding the airwaves with conflicting and confusing messages. Now, some of these nicotine products are marketed as therapeutic. As a non-smoker, doesn't that make you feel sick? Well, at Revelation chapter 17, verse 1 and 2, here we can understand the same sickening feeling that Jehovah has toward false religion. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment on the great prostitute who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed sexual immorality, and earth's inhabitants were made drunk with the wine of her sexual immorality." And verse 5 says, Babylon the Great is identified as the mother of the prostitutes. Disgusting. Now we understand that false religion in all its different guises is promoted by that rebellious angel referred to as Satan. A guise is an appearance typically concealing the true nature of something. Satan promotes all the guises of false religion in the minds of men in order to divert attention from the true God Jehovah. You can learn a lot from the Bible. You can also learn a lot from the fact that certain people don't want you to look at it. The Bible even has a false friend. In the secular world, they frame debates between believers and non-believers, or some other debate that doesn't address the real issue or the real crisis. Now that's the whole idea of false religion, to divert our attention. False religion poisons everything. The real crisis is human rulership, and Jehovah is managing the crisis to give us real hope. Now regarding hope, let's turn to Titus chapter 1. We're going to read verse 2, but the first verse here in Titus chapter 1 is a review. Paul is explaining that he's an apostle according to the faith of God's chosen ones. Now, everyone from Abel down to Mary were convinced of a promised seed. This faith was evident in the valuable sacrifices they made. He goes on, an apostle according to the accurate knowledge of the truth. That's the clear communication of the Bible. And according to godly devotion, that's the transparency we see now in Christian lives. So in verse 2, all of this is based on a hope of the everlasting life that God, who cannot lie, promised long ago. If Jehovah didn't make provisions for sacrifice, communicate clearly, and be transparent in his response to the issue, then man would have no hope. Yet in every one of those areas described in verse 1, Satan is trying to convince the court of public opinion that God is a liar. And what happens when we recognize that the crisis mankind is in is only temporary? Well, your whole perspective changes, and you enjoy a sense of personal freedom that no chains or bars can contain. You can't help it. You feel compelled to make sacrifices yourself. Now, let's take a brief tour of the history of Jehovah's modern-day witnesses as they have declared the kingdom hope. Early in our history, we demonstrate our conviction of the newly installed king. The preaching work is a crisis for those who have their own convictions in the current government system. Our preaching work is called into question when our brothers endure direct persecution. Then the kingdom response was to legally establish the good news. Jehovah authorized the Prince of Peace, as Jesus is referred to move the hearts of officials in high courts all over the world. No man has that kind of power, yet individuals among God's people are being used as instruments. In this way, the preaching activity is recovered. This modern-day record provides further evidence that God's kingdom is real. Today, Jehovah's Witnesses number more than 9 million in over 118,000 congregations worldwide. Just as Isaiah foretold, justice is served, and people have changed their harmful behavior. The harmful behavior is being convinced that humans can govern themselves. Now, getting involved to try and change the current system doesn't make it better. Rather, it just gets worse. In conclusion, now is the time to heed the warning of Revelation chapter 18, verse 4. Imagine you're living in the Chicago area. It's the fall of 1982. You walk into a pharmacy looking for pain relievers. You've trusted Tylenol for many years, so you buy a bottle and take it home. The next day, you have a pounding headache. But you hear a voice from a police car. Do not take Tylenol. Destroy all bottles. And what do? And I heard another voice out of heaven say, Get out of her, my people, if you do not want to share with her in her sins, and if you do not want to receive part of her plagues. Yes, discard any feel-good remedy that's only laced with the intoxicating wine. This is crisis management, just as you would expect from a company protecting its good name. Now, it took the company only 6 weeks to come up with a safety seal. Now what happened in that small area of Chicago is in the distant past. Jehovah knows our pain, but for now he issues a warning. Soon, Jehovah's good name and reputation will be restored in all the universe, and the rebellion that happened here on earth, on this tiny little planet, will be a thing of the past. Now, let's not forget that the crisis is human rulership. It's being managed with pure worship that addresses the real issue in the shortest amount of time possible. Now, from a human perspective, it's taking a long time. Language used in the Bible indicates that Jehovah sees time differently than us. From his perspective, events are shortly taking place. One prophet said it keeps rushing forward. In Jesus' day, the end has drawn near. And there's a tendency to ridicule and ask when, but in Psalms chapter 37, verse 34, it helps us to have Jehovah's perspective. Hope in Jehovah and follow his way, and he will exalt you to take possession of the earth. When the wicked are done away with, you will see it. The psalmist is writing from Jehovah's perspective. If you take action now by getting out of Babylon the Great and going to Jehovah's mountain of pure worship, you'll have the prospect of seeing this evil system's end and entering God's new world. Now you have a better idea of religion's role in world affairs.